Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is acknowledge. Now, I want to take a moment and look at the pronunciation of this word. Previously, when I've worked with other students and introduced this word as a vocabulary word, many look at it, see a vowel followed by three consonants, and think this is going to be a short vowel sound. It's not following a vowel consonant E pattern or something of that nature. But this is a time where we are actually going to shorten the vowel to the schwa sound. So many people want to start this sound like ah, but instead we're going to use the schwa sound. So we want to use acknowledge, acknowledge. I hope that helps. And now we should be ready to look at some definitions for this word. The first way you might hear acknowledged used is to mean to accept or admit the existence or truth of something. We're going to look at some example sentences that fit that particular usage just a little bit later. A second way we might hear acknowledge used is mean to recognize the fact or importance or a particular quality of someone or something. Some people will acknowledge their shortcomings. So maybe things they're not as good at, not their best qualities, but sometimes like, oh, I'm not great at this particular activity or thing. As an example of that, I was just telling someone today, I'm not really good at moving. I'm not as organized as I should be. I'm never as prepared as I should be. So I recognize this is a weakness for myself. A third way you might hear acknowledged used is to mean to express gratitude or appreciation for something. Sometimes, if you mail a gift to someone, you might wait for them to acknowledge, to recognize, and say something like thank you, or maybe send a thank you card to indicate they appreciate what you sent and that they're grateful that you mailed a gift. A fourth way you might hear acknowledge used is to mean to show that someone has noticed someone by making a gesture or a greeting. Now, this particular definition is many times going to be used in the negative. So maybe we see someone we know as we're out walking in our neighborhood, right? And we go, hi, right? We wave. That's a gesture. And the person looks and then looks away, right? So here we would say they didn't acknowledge, they didn't show or demonstrate that they noticed us. They didn't say anything either. That would be the greeting piece, right? So maybe they didn't wave, but if they would say hello, that is acknowledging. You should know that acknowledge is a regular verb. To make the progressive form, you're going to drop the E and then add ing to form acknowledging. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are made by just adding the letter D, since this verb already ends in an E. The base verb, acknowledge, ends in this voiced sound. So our past tense ending is just going to make a D sound, but we're not adding an extra syllable here. So the past tense form should sound like this. Acknowledged, acknowledged. Okay. I just have one phrasal verb for us, and that's acknowledge as. And the first thing I want to tell you is that these two parts to our phrasal verb are always going to be separated. So we're going to have an object come after the verb, acknowledge as something, something or some person, as, and then you will have another noun follow that. So this particular phrasal verb means that someone is publicly announcing, agreeing, or maybe accepting some quality, an achievement, a result, right? It kind of depends on the situation. So let's look at an example sentence to help us understand this meaning. The manager acknowledged herself as a failure. Okay, so here what we're probably saying is this person publicly announced or publicly agreed to other people, I've been really bad at my job. this has not gone well. I'm not doing well. So we see herself. It's a reflexive pronoun that's being used there. That's coming between our verb and the preposition as, and then we see another noun after that, failure. Okay, so you might see some examples of that as we continue on. So let's do a little practice now with our verb of the day in the simple past tense and the present perfect. We'll start with the simple past tense. Remember, we're using this verb tense to talk about an action that was completed at some known time in the past. Now, there might be time signals or clues to what that known time is in a particular sentence, but many times it's understood as part of the context as a conversation, right? So if I ask someone a question with yesterday in it, they don't have to include the word yesterday in their answer. It will be understood that's what we're talking about. That same thing can happen in paragraphs where there are clues that we're talking about some known time in the past, but that known time does not get repeated every sentence. To make a simple past tense sentence in the affirmative, all you need to do is use that past tense form of the verb. This is true no matter what the subject is. Let's look at an example. The internet service provider finally acknowledged that the service area was experiencing problems. So here, this probably connects back to our first definition, right? The truth of. Maybe many people were calling in saying, I think there are problems with my internet. And they would go, oh no, things are okay. But eventually maybe they tweet something announcing, yes, there's a problem in this particular zip code or this particular neighborhood. And so they're kind of, again, accepting the truth and making it very clear to others. Now, if you want to make a negative simple past tense sentence, you want to use did not and then the base verb. Okay, so no ed in the negative. Let's look at another example. They didn't acknowledge me when I saw them at the grocery store yesterday. Right? So that would go back to that example of kind of waving, making a gesture, saying something verbally as a greeting, and the person not doing it back. Okay? And I'll point out there, it's really common for people to use the contraction form, didn't, when they make sentences. You do not have to as you speak or write, but I always like to point that out so that as you're listening to other speakers, you recognize that this is a negative. If you want to make a yes or no question in the simple past tense, start with did, then we'll have our subject, and then the base verb. So again, in our yes or no questions, no ed form of the verb here. An example. Did the art world acknowledge her greatness while she was still living? So this goes back to that definition about recognizing the importance of someone or something. So that's what they did. Did people who study and appreciate art, were they able to see her greatness while she was still a living artist? Unfortunately, for many artists, many times they aren't appreciated until after they have passed. Now, let's take a look at the present perfect. There are two common ways that we use this verb tense. One is to describe an action that started in the past and continues into the present. A second way is to describe something that occurred in the past, but we don't know when. Many times this is called the indefinite past tense. Okay? So a little different than the simple past when we know the time at which something happened. To make an affirmative sentence in the present perfect, you need two parts. You need to use have or has, and that's going to depend on your subject. Right? So I, you, we, they will use have. He, she, and it will use has. Okay, so first part, have or has. Second part, the participle form of the verb. And again, acknowledge is a regular verb, so it's just going to be the past tense form. Let's look at an example. Health officials have acknowledged that the number of new COVID cases are likely much higher than reported. Okay? This is a sentence I saw recently in a news report. Again, recognizing that many people might have been vaccinated, may have mild symptoms, and so they think, I'm okay, so I'm not going to get a test. So we don't really know how many people have actually had COVID recently. If you want to make a negative present perfect sentence, again, we're going to follow the same structure, starting with have or has, depending on what our subject is. But then we need to add not before our participle. Here's another example. The president hasn't acknowledged that he made a mistake. Okay, so the idea here might be not yet. So this action, in a way, hasn't started in the past. It still hasn't continued into the present, but it may occur at some point in the future. If you want to make a yes or no question in the present perfect, you're going to start with have or has, whichever form matches your subject, and the subject comes next, and then you'll use the participle form of the verb. Here's another example. Has the candidate acknowledged that he lost the election? So again, this goes back to that idea of recognizing something as a fact. Let's spend just another moment here looking at a word that is related to our verb, acknowledge. And what we're going to look at is the noun form of our verb, acknowledgement. Just like our verb, this noun can have a number of different meanings. We're going to focus on 3 of them today. The first way you might hear acknowledgement used is to mean the acceptance of the truth or existence of something. Let's look at an example of this meaning in a sentence. The college created a land acknowledgement statement to recognize all the indigenous people who had been driven from the land. So there are some complex ideas in this sentence, but it is something that is happening more commonly and more regularly now. As you may or may not know, the United States was inhabited by millions of indigenous people prior to the Europeans, the European colonists, coming over and settling here in what is now the United States. And the colonists drove the indigenous people who some long ago were called Indians, not really correct. Many times now we refer to them as Native Americans. The people who are native to this land were forced from where they had lived for centuries, if not thousands of years. And now many places are being more aware of this, and they want to accept that the colonists had a role in moving them off the land. And so where we are today, or where particular schools are today, are acknowledging kind of like we have benefited in a way, because we have our campus here, we have all of our schools, all of our buildings on this land that really isn't ours. Okay, second way to use acknowledgement is the action of expressing or displaying gratitude or appreciation for something. An example of that, she received an award in acknowledgement of all her volunteer service. Right? So this award was a way to display gratitude or to say, we appreciate how much you volunteer. A third way to use the noun acknowledgement is to refer to an author's or publisher's statement of gratitude that comes at the beginning of a book. You might have seen these pages if you enjoy reading novels and other books. An example of this meaning in a sentence could be the author's acknowledgement credited all of his teachers and mentors. Right? So there might be some sort of statement, I would have never written this book without the help of, and maybe a listing of names, or some type of description. And again, that's done to express gratitude. And I'm very grateful you have watched this video. I hope to see you back tomorrow. Have a great day.